Are you ready to explore how people coordinate, to build and empower your community, to take action and solve problems, to coordinate without any central authority? What? Bringing in the OGs of the pre-crypto decentralized coordination space together with the pioneers of the cutting-edge technologies to fuse their ancient knowledge with the latest tools in order to fight coordination failures, slay Moloch, and continue the endless search for the holy grails of decentralized coordination. Welcome to the front lines of coordination. Fuck. My brain is already melting. I hope you survive. All right. Welcome, Zach, to the Frontiers of Coordination podcast.
Thanks, Beth. It's awesome to join you.
How are you doing on this day?
I am doing just fine on this day. Great, actually. As we might get into, feeling great that we launched our co-sols feature yesterday, which takes Coordinate Give on chain, takes contribution history on chain, and we had 2,000 people mint it in the last 24 hours. So pretty excited that there's interest and excitement around this new generative NFT thing that we made. So I'm doing great.
Awesome. Yeah, congrats on the launch. We minted ours at Metagame, and whoever is listening and using Coordinape should definitely go mint theirs. We will include the link in the show notes.
Awesome.
So for those who don't know you, would you care to share a brief intro?
Sure. So I am Zach and co-founder of Coordinape. I've been in the sort of Web3 world relatively new, just for the last couple years, and found my way here just because of my enduring interest in collaboration and coordination, and how people can do more together than they can alone. And so I was previously co-founded a consulting network called Converge, where we brought people together to address social and environmental issues through impact networks. And then when I discovered DAOs, just got really excited about the potential for decentralized peer-to-peer collaboration to create global impact networks at scale using blockchain technology. So that's when I really dove in and started contributing at Yearn and other DAOs. And Coordinape really was born out of that experience of how do we do decentralized, compensation and appreciation and acknowledgement, just recognizing people for their work. Yeah, so that's a bit about me.
All right. I didn't know that you also co-founded Converge. And I mean, I knew you were a long-time friends with David, but I didn't know that, you were on that as well.
Yeah, myself, David Ehrlichman, and David Sawyer started Converge almost exactly about 10 years ago. Yeah, I'm happy that David Ehrlichman is a genius behind networks and coordination. And after I started getting interested in Web3, he started poking around as well, and is now one of the co-founders of Hats, which is a really exciting project too. So yeah, it's awesome to be on this coordination adventure with him for the last decade.
Yeah, I love David. I mean, he's been on this podcast as well, but before they started Hats, we should get him on again.
Oh yeah. Yeah, talking about impact networks. Yeah, Hats is doing cool stuff. We're excited to be collaborating with them as well, seeing the overlaps between Hats and Coordinape.
Oh, nice. Yeah, glad to hear that's going on. That's cool. You want to say a brief intro to Converge or the impact networks for the people who haven't listened to the podcast episode with David, which they should?
Sure. Converge is really born out of this idea that, like, to solve these wicked problems and systemic issues that we have, we need to bring networks of folks together and build trust among them so that they can collaborate effectively. So kind of an example of this is we helped to launch the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. So there's 500,000 acres of redwoods in a 3-county area in California that's facing a lot of pressure from a variety of factors, right? From development, from climate change, from trespassing, all of these things. And amongst that 500,000 acres, there's also, many different stakeholders, landowners, whose idea of what stewardship means can be different, right? So we brought together, the CEOs of logging companies and ranching operations with land trusts, local tribes, state and federal agencies like CAL FIRE and the state parks. This diverse group who all had a deep connection to that land and had very low trust in each other. In some cases, literally had been fighting each other for generations. We had, the Sempervirens Fund, kind of the oldest anti-logging group, as well as, CEO of local timber companies, and really bringing them together and building trust, building understanding, building a shared context, and finding what are those leverage points in the system that we all can agree would really help to change things for all of us. And so through facilitated gatherings, now I sort of call them like it was basically like an IRL DAO, bringing all these people together and then helping them create governance and relationship building. And they've really done some pretty remarkable things as far as, land swaps to increase wildlife corridors, removing lots of regulations that kind of didn't help anybody. And then when they were to come together with united voice, could be a lot more effective. So, and there's case studies on this and several other the impact networks that we worked on the converge.net website. But the basic idea, I've worked with migrant rights across borders, working with smallholder farmers throughout East Africa. In all of these issues, it's really how do you bring people together, build a shared context and trust, and identify leverage points for action. And so a lot of my perspectives on DAOs and decentralized decision-making, governance, etc., come out of that experience with networks over the past decade. And the last thing I'll say about Converge is also it was the way that we organized ourselves at Converge as a network. So Converge didn't have any employees. We didn't have a payroll. We would invoice clients, and then whatever team had worked on that project would sit around a table, sometimes literally, and we would divide up the money according to what we thought was fair, given everyone's contribution. And we found that worked really well, not only from a fairness standpoint, but also just a team hygiene, getting real time, clear feedback, hearing what people appreciated, hearing what people, think you could do better on. And that feedback has a little higher stakes because there's actually money attached to it. So there was many inspirations that sort of led to Coordinate, but that was certainly one of them, is sort of an experiment in seeing if we could scale that system that we had via software.
I love it. If you want to learn more about previous work, they should read David's book. By the way, did you also co-write that book, or was it just David?
No, I mean, it was definitely a team effort in sort of building the body of knowledge. I did a lot of reading and input on the book, but writing a book is he did it. It's definitely his. I feel like I feel a little bit of ownership in it, but he wrote it, so all credit goes to him.
I just wanted to make sure I don't say it's his book. So yeah.
Yeah, when we're all together, I say it was basically co-written, but the truth is that he did the hard work of sitting down and doing it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. There's the podcast episode with David. There's the book Impact Networks, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. And there's also a short playbook that was written by David for Metagame called How to Build Impact Networks. It's all going to be linked in the show notes for those who want to learn more. And then, going on to Coordinape. So for those who haven't heard about
Coordinape somehow yet. What is Coordinape?
Coordinate's a platform for any decentralized or digital native team to essentially acknowledge, appreciate, and reward your fellow contributors or your fellow colleagues. And the way that it works is uh, we use tokens called give, and each person in your circle for your project has 100 give, and they can give to the people that they see doing good work or adding value to a project. And that give is both serves as kind of a reputation marker, right? It shows that other people have found what you've done to be valuable, and now with Coastal, you can take that on chain to sort of start to build your Web3 on chain resume, and you can also use it for compensation. So teams will allocate a budget to a coordinate circle, and then it's distributed proportionally according to the number of give you get. So if you get 10% of all the give in a circle, you would get 10% of that budget. There's some other features where you can share contributions, and there's an activity feed, so you can start to sort of have a dashboard and see the kind of different things that people are working on. You can send notes to each other to really make people feel seen, appreciated, acknowledged for their contributions, which we consistently hear from users is one of their favorite parts. But yeah, it's really a way for decentralized teams to appreciate and reward each other for the work that they've done instead of having a sort of central entity decide, here's how much you get. It also increases the accountability, where I'm not trying to necessarily just please one manager. It's really like the team will see the value that I've added and reward me accordingly, and then I can, that creates a really powerful feedback loop as far as what am I doing that creates value? How can I do that better? What do we value as a team, etc.
I love it. Yeah, we've been using it for I think about 6 months now, and I mean, yeah, we had our own mistakes, but overall, I really like it, and I recommend it to anybody, not just starting a Web3 project or a DAO, but anybody who's starting any project with friends or like any business. I think it's really great way of like splitting the pie in general, like regardless of whether it's a decentralized organization or not. It's a good way for people to figure out who should get paid.
Yeah, I think even for teams that aren't, I'm obviously biased. I've been working this way for a really long time, but I feel like the conversations that come out of an allocation are as valuable as the allocation itself. And we've even seen, teams that aren't working in Web3, but just want to have a way to track contributions and have a shared display to sort of frame these conversations using Coordinate without a budget attached to it, to really just understand and appreciate and value all the different contributions that people are making. So, we sort of started out as a compensation tool, and it's still, I think, useful for that. But lots of startup teams are using it to, distribute sort of pre-tokens. So we don't have a token yet, but if we ever do, now we have this contribution tracker so that we don't have to just fall back on like, oh, founders get this much, and here's the next tier, get this much. But we can really be accurate to who's added value in building this thing and reward them accordingly.
Right. Yeah, it's so much better than coming up with a fixed schema, which tends to change as soon as the project actually gets started. And like even if the actual distribution ends up the same as if it's done like by a single person in a centralized way, like these conversations of like, okay, so discussing like what are the contribution, what's valuable, what's not, like all of this, as you said, like is very valuable for projects.
Yeah, for sure. If people can have those conversations and make them about sort of the collective data and less personal, yeah, it's really valuable.
So what would you say? So like, yeah, Coordinate is kind of inspired and built based on how you were operating in Converge. So what would you say are like the biggest differences, and like what translated well and what not so well? So like what's better or what's worse in like taking this concept from like the physical space to an online app?
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of the challenges with doing this at bigger scales and online, obviously, first and foremost is just when you're having tough conversations about money and about value added, doing it face to face is vastly preferable. We're we're biological creatures that evolved to communicate face to face. A lot of our communication happens non-verbally, energetically, subconsciously. And so trying to do it in a totally text based medium, for example, is already really challenging. The other part is trying to allocate value in bigger circles when you may not have the full context of everything that people are working on. And so this is something that often comes up. It's like, well, who is qualified to say whether someone added value or not, right? Or how much context do you need to really be accurate in terms of, what somebody has done? For myself, being a co-founder of the project, but also, severely non-technical in terms of, understanding how the sort of real guts of how software gets built. I've never written a line of code in my life. So, am I really qualified to determine the value that devs have created? And the answer is sort of like no, but there is an 80-20 kind of principle. And I think the teams that are most successful with Coordinape are the ones who recognize that it's not going to be perfect, but the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. But I would say just the asynchronous and text-based component, giving somebody feedback that says, you really could have done that better. If they can hear my tone of voice and, see my body language, that I'm saying that out of sort of care and not definitively, that's going to land a lot differently than if they just see a flat text message that says you could have done this better. It comes across much sharper. And that's really still a growth edge for us, trying to find ways that we could sort of emulate the, strong opinions lightly held, and, ultimately coming from a place of care and not coming from a place of like definitive accusation, but mutual exploration. Like all those things are extremely hard to do via text. And that's something that, I think we'll continue to sort of wrestle with, to figure out how can we make this intermediated experience more human and more, creating connection as opposed to creating disconnection and defensiveness, which is a real danger when you're giving, feedback and sharing with people online.
Right, definitely. Yeah, it all comes back to good communication and context. Like if a developer says, "Oh, I refactored this," and then like another developer might know that it takes like 20 hours to do that, but a normal person doesn't have any idea like how much it takes. So like adding more information is what I found myself returning to, and like urging others to do. Like just if you feel like you're not getting enough gives from others, like add more context, like add more detail to like how much effort it actually took you to do this. Because if you write a single sentence, like people simply won't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's human challenges around. I have a lot of experience in organizational development and consulting with Fortune 100 companies, and something that's consistent across all teams I've ever worked with is generally people feel like you don't understand what it takes to do my job. Like no one really feels adequately appreciated a lot of the time, because they're having their experience of wrestling with tough problems, and everyone else is kind of in the same boat. So, that's always going to be a challenge, is that people consistently sort of overweight their own contribution and level of effort and underweight that of others. And so when you put that all together, it takes some sort of collective effort and understanding. And how do we recognize that inherent bias and move past it? And again, like if teams can sort of sit with that tension and move through it, I think it makes them, much, much more effective. but it can be challenging, to have those tough conversations. That's something that, I always offer any team using Coordinate, offer them a consulting session to do a retro after a distribution, to just kind of come together in a facilitated way and talk about what the results were and what we can learn from them. Because I think over time, teams will get a lot better at sort of using the coordinate distribution as also a shared display to have a conversation about how we can do better as a team.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, actually recently added it to our recurring agenda to every month before the epoch concludes. On the main call, we go through the contributions and discuss there's an opportunity for people to ask others questions that about their contributions that they don't understand, or they can share okay, I'm assigning you this much because of this or whatever, to have that communication going. And then after the epoch concludes, to do a retrospective where people can share, talk about the results and okay, I got this much, I'm disappointed because of this, and then others might offer an explanation and stuff like that.
I think that's definitely a best practice. If you want to get the most out of Coordinate, that's a really valuable thing to do, is to have some synchronized, whether it's before, during, or after, for sure.
Yeah, just the text alone in the UI, I think it's just not sufficient to do it properly at this point. And maybe that's one thing that you could potentially do. So integrating something like Jitsi, which works integrated as an iframe and doesn't take a lot of effort to actually integrate and become a part of a website. So maybe there could be an option directly inside the Coordinate, click this, and there's a window that pops up and takes you into a video call.
Right. Yeah. Integrate video calls. And even, we've done some experiments and prototypes before with including basically a meeting agenda, so here's how to run a Coordinate retro. So if people want to experiment with them themselves, it's easy to do.
Oh, that's good as well. Yeah, I would love to see that agenda template.
Yeah, happy to share it. I don't think it made it to the Coordinate site yet, but we've definitely created it.
Awesome. And so now we talked about the bad part or the hard part. So what would you say is there anything that actually works better online than it worked doing this sort of thing in the real world without Coordinate?
Certainly the scale of it and the tracking of contributions, which both works. I guess there's two sides to that, but all of the conversations and the valuable sort of feedback, the contributions, all the things that we did to put on these pretty complicated, convenings to bring all these people together in real life, all of that is not stored anywhere. I can't share it. And now with contributions and, as we start bringing Give on chain and things like that, having that record and reputation, I think is really valuable, right? If we had been entering contributions in Coordinate, people would see that, for example, that I've designed and facilitated, events for up to 300 people across, 14 different countries. Whereas now you'd only know that if you talk to me. But having that record, I think, is going to be increasingly really valuable. And it's really fun to think about, as this ecosystem evolves, as Web3 evolves, having all of these contributions start to be searchable, start to be hey, how can I find people? How could I make, allow lists out of people who have certain, levels of Give, or who have certain skill sets that have been vouched for, etc. Pretty exciting to think about that, farther in the future. The other thing that I think will be really valuable is, as we find ways right now, contributions are manually entered, and finding ways to do that more passive is something that we're really keen to do some thinking on, whether those are AI tools or integrations, but how can my work sort of passively turn into contributions so I don't have to enter it, kind of like a time card, I've done all this work. Now I have to go describe it. Is there a way that I can just do the work and have it passively be uploaded into contributions? I think would be a pretty huge unlock. And so, right now, in the research phase of that, and certainly welcome anyone out there that has, ideas or perspectives on ways we could accomplish that. I think it would be a pretty huge upgrade to have, some level of kind of auto-filled contributions so that you could just within your workflow be documenting and sharing with people what you've been doing. I think would be super valuable. So those are the online is basically the record and the scale for which you can do it, collaborating with people all over the world and being able to share value. Obviously the talent pool increases exponentially when you have the opportunity to acknowledge and reward people, anyone who's interested in your project, not just who's collaborating with you locally.
Right. Yeah, the lack of automatic tracking has been one criticism that some people from Metagame had, because the source code which we used previously, that was one thing that it did. Well, yeah, not one, but that's one thing that people really liked. But it's just hard to get it right. And with the D-work, for example, integration, I think the issue is that it only takes the title of the card, and then there's still that problem of lack of context, because there's just the title of the contribution rather than the whole description.
Yeah, there's really there's a big trade-off as we do, decentralization. Like in some ways, it's much more efficient to have one manager that is the source of truth for who's doing a good contribution, what's valuable. And that way, no one else really has to think about it. But, that creates a pretty intense failure point as well. If that manager isn't good or is overly biased, or all the different things that we've all experienced with managers being fallible humans as well. It does ask more of everyone to have to keep up with more of the context of what everybody's doing. But for me, I believe that there's a sort of go slow to go fast strategy there, where everyone having more context and understanding and having more cohesive pods, maybe not the entire organization doesn't need to keep context on everyone. But if, small teams of, two pizza teams are really keeping track and more up on context, I think it ultimately is going to create much higher performance.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's something there with using AI for it. For example, if we had AI on the stand-up calls, and then they could automatically formulate the contributions and just send it off to people for approval, and people say, okay, this really captured my contributions properly. I don't have to write them. Let's get it. Just click this button to get it onto Coordinape or something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of the dream. Is not so much people generally don't mind editing, but it's hard to create from white space. So I think people would really be into editing a series of contributions and saying oh, you got this right. No, that one you didn't get right, versus having to generate all of their contributions wholesale. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful about the potential for AI to help kind of with that grunt work, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's not far. I mean, people already have these AIs that they add to Zoom calls to make transcripts, and then just it's a matter of prompting them to.
Yeah, I experimented with some of those as well, and it does. Again, it's it's not sort of ready, but it's definitely way easier to just adjust those quickly and turn it over than write notes yourself from a call.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel so distant. And yeah, the whole point about having the full history of contributions is also super valuable. And for example, what Praise is doing, where they you have the whole recorded history, and then they have the AI who writes your short bio for your profile, based on your contributions. It writes what kind of things do you do, and in this case, it could also write a whole page of the CV.
Yeah, I saw that. I think Praise is doing some really cool stuff with that, trying to, I really appreciate they also are kind of trying to really lean into the qualitative. I think that's something that, is difficult, but really important for us to do in this digital space, is how can we be more qualitative and recognize all the different kinds of value that people add, aside from just kind of the concrete outputs that they create. But, how they contribute to team culture and how they contribute to, overall success versus individual success, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely captures wider variety of contributions, because like you're not gonna write some like more personal stuff like, oh, I helped this person or I did this, but you're gonna get praised for it. So I think combination of those could be powerful.
That's where I think, Coordinate really shines, is giving the chance to be able to just, that person really helped me out on a call. We had limited interaction, but I definitely want to acknowledge them for that. I can give them, forgive or something. So it creates that opportunity for the collective to really recognize all these different forms of value that are being added.
I think it would be cool to be able to attach contributions to people, because like when you just add a higher number, they don't know like why you gave them a bigger number. I mean, you can write there like a comment, but yeah, being able to add contributions might be a cool feature.
Yeah, that's something we're exploring actually, is being able to give, to specific contributions. So right now on contributions in Coordinate, you can react with emojis, but potentially being able to add give in that screen as well is something really interesting. And we're also exploring this idea of props, which is, anyone in the organization, whether they're in a circle or not, can send a prop to someone, essentially like just really recognizing them and saying thanks, either for a specific contribution or, just a general sort of like shout out, and adding those to your COSOL data as well, to sort of recognize there's lots of different kinds of contributions, and they don't have to all be, directly related to give and budgets, but just, being able to shout out people for specific things they did
Right.
is something that we're definitely exploring going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. I like that.
Yeah.
And so then zooming out a bit, what would you say has been the hardest part about actually building Coordinape?
Oh, man. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me, like personally, the hardest thing has been, just not being technical, really not having to learn kind of on a vertical learning curve, what it takes to build software, how that process works, how long things take, and really appreciating like both the art and science of, writing code and building software.
Can definitely relate there.
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge and also an opportunity. Sometimes I'll ask a dumb question that's actually helpful, but most of the time they're just dumb questions. But, that's definitely been an education. And then I would say more broadly, one of the most challenging things is just, it's a very difficult problem. We're trying to use technology to solve what is fundamentally a social problem. There's a lot of challenges in trying to work this way. That's more relational, that's more contextual, that's obviously, going to take more time and more mental bandwidth. How do you solve problems where people are gaming things or colluding? Like, how do you solve the problem when someone gives me give and, I'm not really sure why, and I wasn't going to give them any. I'm not sure really what they contributed, but now I have this sort of like social obligation, or do I, right? All of these sort of very social and interpersonal issues come up, and they require a certain level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and open communication. And these are all things that are, hard to do in the best circumstances. And like we talked about earlier, when you're doing them, text-based on the internet, across cultures, across all sorts of difference, the difficulty level goes way up. I think it's something that we don't necessarily, give ourselves credit for. And I think it's certainly easy to call out all the challenges that we have, with DAOs, in DAOs, making this sort of decentralized online collaboration work. I think, I'll speak for me personally. I get so excited about the potential, and also sometimes, frustrated by the progress and the challenges that we experience. But, we're playing this on the highest difficulty mode of, remotely collaborating across language, culture, time zones all over the world. We need to, I think, be compassionate to ourselves and give it some time, that we're really trying to create a new paradigm of peer-to-peer global collaboration, and that's a wicked problem to try and solve. So solving these inherent kind of social problems with tech, incredibly challenging, but also I think, obviously I feel like it's really worthwhile, and that's when I'm putting my energy into it.
Definitely. It takes a lot of time and effort, but yeah, it seems to be worth it. And then zooming further out, so where do you see Coordinape in 5 to 10 years? Like, what's the end game?
Oh man, I mean, we're definitely playing an emergent and infinite game. So I don't know that I can say right now there's an end game we're definitely pointing to. There's a lot of different ways that we're trying to just be open to sort of seeing, where users want Coordinate to evolve into. But I can say some of the things I'm excited about are, really leaning into the social graph aspect. So, right now there's a lot of interesting kind of data that's generated within circles, but branching that out, as we introduce the orgs feature, so now people can be members of orgs as well as circles, and then starting to look at some of the metadata that gets generated, being able to search across circles, being able to look at different social graphs and connections that people are forging sort of across projects. As Coordinate increases adoption and the user experience gets better and better, I think there'll be a lot of pretty interesting and useful data generated. We're always kind of managing this dynamic tension between simplicity and nuance. So it'd be great to be able, for example, to give to people for specific skills or specific contributions. If I didn't just have a give number, but had like give for marketing or business development or writing this kind of code, like the more nuance we can enter, the more useful it'll be, but also balancing just simplicity of use so that people can, kind of quickly do allocations and not turn it into a whole job in and of itself. I think, more like I said, integration and into flow of work. So integrating with other tools and also, really trying to leverage AI to make contributions and maybe even eventually give more passive than it is now, so that, people are sort of truing up and editing contributions and allocation instead of sort of doing them from zero each time. That's something I think when I look at 5 to 10 years, I hope that Coordinate runs more in the background. And then, lastly, I would love personally to see Coordinate develop more tools to help teams be more developmentally informed. How can we use the Coordinate process to build more trust and, create more cohesive and effective teams? How can we teach people skills and having, hard conversations in skillfully delivering and receiving feedback from each other, and really help our work be like another arena for personal development, without being heavy-handed about it. But I think there's a real opportunity there, and I think there's a real desire there for people to have more authentic connection and, higher trust, more ability to experiment, to really get clear feedback from their peers. I think we're in a good position to support people in that if we can sort of crack the code on how to do it in a fun and light touch way without it being, too serious or overbearing. So those are, in 5 to 10 years, I would love to see Coordinate have a rich searchable data set to be used by lots of teams running in the background, and for Coordinate, give on chain to be a very high signal marker for people to follow of, who's contributing in Web3, and also have some tools for teams that want to increase their, relational and capacity for trust in order to perform better as well.
I love it. So this future is fairly distant, and the day to day is hard. So what keeps you going? What gives you the fuel?
I think for me, what keeps me going, maybe this is cliche at this point, but I feel like I'm consistently meeting the people that I meet in the Web3 space, and especially in sort of our little corner of the world of people that are interested in in DAOs and public goods and regenerative finance. And there's just so many people who I think are attracted to this space because it offers the opportunity to create new systems. I've been an activist for more than half my life. I was doing tree sits in college in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, trying to stop logging operations. And then I became a sustainability consultant to try and make change from the inside. And, I think a lot of people clearly recognize that, most of our institutions and most of our systems are broken. And, whether it's totally true or not, I think Web3 offers this potential for creating new systems rather than fighting against the old ones. And that to me is something, that's exciting and worthwhile. And I want to be around people who are operating, somewhere within that same ethos. And I think that's, the culture that I experience a lot here in the Web3 and DAO space. So that's what keeps me going. I think that we really do have the tools to do things better than sort of default systems. And yeah, it's fourth quarter on planet Earth. We're in crunch time. We're in a pretty tight change window from the perspective of a lot of these wicked problems we're navigating. Environmental issues, social issues. We all sort of see how things are stacking up and pretty volatile. And it feels like now is really the time to figure out some new ways of doing things. And there's a high concentration of people doing that here in Web3. So that's sort of a constant source of inspiration for me.
Very well said. I can relate with all of it. And then, getting, I guess, a tiny bit more specific. What are some of the other things that excite you about this future of coordination and building like new kinds of systems and socioeconomic ecosystems, whatever you can get, like specific projects or just like vague ideas, whatever you think is appropriate.
I mean, I give a shout out to Cabin. The decentralized city that we're building there, I think is a really cool experiment. Really excited about how that's developing and the kind of folks that are being, excited and attracted to contribute there. I always give a shout out to Kraus House. I think that they're another one who's really thinking about the concrete implications of why blockchain, what can we actually use it for, and some pretty cool ideas of like, the internet's home team and what would it look like for people to start to own sports teams that they support. That kind of stuff is super exciting to me. And I think just, a lot of these tools that are coming online, Coordinate being one example, that the use of the tool hopefully can start to also help change mindsets. I think one of the big unlocks of DAOs is really recognizing the opportunity and the challenges of real sovereignty. And, we're the ones we've been waiting for, and the kind of sort of trust and accountability that's required to move into a paradigm when you're using a tool like Coordinate, I think is really valuable and spreads to all sorts of other places, how we live and how we work. I know you said get more concrete, and I got pretty abstract again pretty quickly. But those are the things I'm really excited about. It's like how can these tools also change the way fundamentally that we sort of relate to work and relate to what does it mean to collaborate and get things done. There are many forms of currency. We all need to pay the bills, but what are other ways also that we can gain and derive value through relationships and experiences? I think folks like Cabin, Kraus House, I think Quests, where you can sort of invite anyone into a project that you're excited about and kind of get going collaborating. Lots of really cool stuff happening as people think about not just the technology, but what does it enable.
Definitely. Yeah, beautifully said. And it's a perfect note to wrap it on. Do you have anything else that you would like to say before we end the episode?
No, shout out to the metagame crew. It was one of the first, I think it might be like one of the first couple Discords that I joined and got some seeds, and really like it was the metagame kind of ethos is I really resonated with, and I think, you all are doing a lot to sort of help propagate and forward this narrative of, what is Web3 for? How can we actually build new systems, play different games? So, just like big props and shout out to the metagame folks for what you're doing too. I think it's a project that's only going to gain momentum as the story becomes clearer, and more folks that are looking for sort of the meaning underneath the technology come to the space.
Right. There's so much hype and scams and everything that makes it hard for people to see, like, why are we here? Like, what's the actual meaning, and what's the potential? And I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, we hope to onboard a lot more people into at least understanding the ecosystem, and then to projects like you mentioned and Coordinate.
For sure. Big props to Metagame, and thanks for the time and the conversation.
Thank you for coming on. It was a great conversation.
Have an awesome MetaFest. I will be at the next one for sure.
I hope so. Thank you. And see you around.
All right. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.